Members of the business community have pledged to work with government to address issues and growth in South Africa. Let's speak to Martin Kingston, the head of business for South Africa. Martin, thanks so much for your time on SABC News. Just please give us context as to why business leaders came together and the state of South Africa at the moment.
Well, Zinga, we all recognize that there are very significant challenges, headwinds with respect to the economy, and obviously as a consequence of that, the ability to make investments, create real sustainable growth and indeed create jobs. At the beginning of this year, we remobilized Business for South Africa in very clear focused work streams with respect to energy, transport and logistics, and crime and corruption. Those are joint areas of focus with the government. There are structures that have overseen them, such as the National Energy Crisis Committee established by President Ramaphosa last August to implement the Energy Action Plan, the National Logistics Crisis Committee to look at road, rail and ports, as well as the Joint Initiative on Crime and Corruption. All of those government structures where business is actively participating, led by CEOs across the breadth of the economy.
It's been said that those interventions, when implemented, will have the potential to see 3% growth in our GDP. How?
Well, there's no doubt, and we've done the modeling, that these three areas reduce confidence levels very substantially. They preclude long-term investment from taking place. And it is that investment that spurs both growth and the creation of jobs. We estimate that they contribute approximately 3% to GDP growth, maybe a little bit more. And that over time, that can create actually several hundreds of thousands, we think actually probably closer to 2 million jobs. But by 2030, to do that, we need to lay the groundwork. Now we need to lift confidence levels, and we can only do that by decisive interventions in a limited number of focused areas where we can demonstrate that progress is being made. We think that we can harness resources from across the business community in a coordinated, integrated way. That's exactly what we're doing in energy, transport and logistics, and now starting to do, working alongside and in support of government in the context of crime and corruption, recognizing at all times that we need to respect the integrity and the independence of the state. But we've got skills, expertise and resources that absolutely need to be made available and mobilized, not just, by the way, from the business community, but I would argue across society at large.
Martin, there's those three areas that you said you're focused on, and while those may deal with the issues that we're experiencing often now, will they deal with, say, the challenges of inequality that place a greater burden on government than if they were resolved?
Well, Mzinga, the only way that we're going to deal with poverty or indeed inequality is by creating sustainable, inclusive growth. The private sector accounts for approximately 88% of all of the jobs, formal and informal, in South Africa. And when I talk about the private sector, that means, of course, in particular, small, medium-sized and micro enterprises in the formal and in the informal economy. The only way that we're going to address the issues of inequality is by creating that sustainable growth. And we hope that that will emerge as a consequence of these focused interventions. Of course, not just in these areas, there are other areas that will need to be prioritized as quickly as possible: water, municipal infrastructure and others. But our view is that we need to channel limited resources into those areas that are most impactful, where we can see low-hanging fruit being picked as quickly as possible. And in all cases, that can only happen by working collaboratively and in partnership with government. That was the meeting that took place with the president earlier this week, where we, as I said, took stock. It was the third such meeting of the progress that's being made, and will scale accordingly. The pledge that some 115 CEOs committed to last week, in fact, I think it's closer to 125 now, is a demonstration both of the concerns expressed by the business community, but of the willingness of the leadership of that business community to step up the plate and assist in addressing these very, very challenging problems.
Martin, it's something that you raised a little bit earlier on. You spoke about the independence of government. What would you say about a concern of the private sector intervening, being an opportunity for state capture, influence peddling and the like?
I think that's a correct concern. We are absolutely committed to providing both the reassurances that it won't happen in two ways. The first is that all of these areas are ultimately the domain of the state. Policy making and implementation is the sole responsibility of the state. It doesn't mean that we can't have a view, we can't give inputs, hopefully drawing upon our expertise. Here we're talking about capacitating the state directly or indirectly with skills, resources and expertise that we know resides beyond the public sector, in the private sector. It needs to be properly moderated, it needs to be overseen. We put in place, when I say we, the government alongside ourselves, governance structures, a joint strategic oversight committee, which is chaired by the Director General in the presidency, in which we sit all the way down these processes. We have appropriate governance structures. And the most important thing is that we report openly, honestly, and transparently, as well as regularly, to the public at large about the work that we're doing. When I say we, again, these joint structures, so that we can all be held accountable. There must be no scope whatsoever, as you put it, Nzinga, for influence peddling, any form of corruption or lobbying. But if we can take advantage of, as I said, the resources and the capacity that exists in the private sector, and it does, and put it at the disposal of the state, then I believe that that's our obligation.
Martin Kingston, the head of business for South Africa, thanks so much for your time on SABC News this afternoon. Just talking to us about that initiative where the private sector is working with government in order to try and address some of the very large challenges that we face here in South Africa. Thanks so much for your time.